Well, hello, everybody. It's so good to be back with you again. Um, so this is part 5 of a 6-part series that we're doing here at Unity Kitchener. And it's based on this book by Sharif Abdullah, Creating a World That Works for All. And essentially, Sharif is pointing out that today's world does not work for all. It seems to be working for and controlled by people at the top of a socioeconomic ladder and who would prefer to keep it that way. And our intention with this series is to become more spiritually and emotionally aware of the underlying drivers that have led us to creating this system, and to be able to respond with greater skill and mindfulness in order that we can co-create a world that works for all. So today I want to bring you up to speed with what we've covered thus far, and then talk to you about what Sharif calls the revolution in consciousness. So in week 1, we talked about breakers, menders, and keepers, which are the 3 primary elements Sharif describes of consciousness that affect our own personal functioning and the functioning of society. And we have not only one, but all 3. And we go in and out demonstrating different values that we honor and live by, depending on our circumstances at the time. In week 2, Mel talked about the mess. This is the mess that we created by our breaker consciousness that believes that we are separate from God, separate from one another, and separate from the earth. It is this consciousness that allows me not to treat my neighbor as myself. That if I'm okay and I'm ahead, that's all that matters. So the epidemic numbers of coronavirus deaths, or deaths from opioids, of socioeconomic disparity, of the mass shootings, of teen suicides, global climate change, these are all their problems and not mine. I'm not responsible, which is really saying I'm irresponsible. This is the mess. So in week 3, we talked about the other, recognizing that each of us represents the other to someone. And it's our mender consciousness that allows us to recognize that things aren't working for all. It's the mender consciousness that has the capacity to self-examine our fears and our behaviors, and is willing to seek ways to mend those gaps, to mend the brokenness that prevents us from creating this world that works for all. And we talked about moving from an exclusive society to an inclusive society in our work communities and our church communities and other groups. And we said that an exclusive community demands conformity and the rule of authoritarian law, whereas the inclusive group welcomes our differences as valuable and essential to the whole. And then finally, last week, we probed deeper into the awareness of our breaker and mender consciousness and the importance of taking off our blinders, that regardless of the mess that may be around us, we are the ones to do what we can, where we are, with what we have, in order to evolve into a more inclusive and kinder world for all. And if you didn't see that talk, or even if you did, I encourage you to go back and see it again. Mel just did an outstanding job, and I think we could have even just closed the whole series with her talk last week. She was extraordinary. So I encourage you, it got posted on our Unity Kitchener YouTube station on Friday. I encourage you to go back and watch that again, or for the first time if you haven't yet. And so now I want to start today by sharing from Sharif's book, a historical story. In 1776, there was a British explorer named Captain Cook, who landed on Kerguelen Island, which is in the far South Indian Ocean, very close to Antarctica. This island is about the size of Connecticut, or the size of, say, the Niagara Peninsula from Hamilton to Niagara Falls. It's a big island, and it's remote, and it's quite desolate and cold. And so what Captain Cook decided to do was to release some rabbits onto the island with the intention that this would provide some food for any following sailors who may find their way to this island. The island was covered with grasses, and the rabbits had no natural predators. So in very short time, they overpopulated the island. There were hundreds and thousands, perhaps millions of them on this island. And then, after eating every single blade of grass, they all died. The rabbits destroyed the island grasses, and then they destroyed themselves by overpopulating and overconsumption. They didn't know how to limit their reproduction or put caps on consumption. They were blind to what they were doing to their environment. And Sharif and I share this story because the behavior of the rabbits demonstrates our own breaker consciousness in a world that works for me. When I believe that I am separate from the other. See, the rabbits believed that the grass would be there always, and they could always do what rabbits do. Our human population has doubled in my lifetime. And given the current rate of growth, is expected to double again soon. We human beings are multiplying and consuming like rabbits, with no predators, as if our planet Earth's resources are inexhaustible. So what are we going to do to make less of a carbon footprint on the Earth? To give some kind of hope in a healthy future for our grandchildren and their grandchildren? What are we willing to do differently? Sharif points out that the trajectory is not set. However, it is highly impacted by the culture that we learn and that we adopt for ourselves. Our culture teaches us our belief systems, or for short, our BS. So for example, do we consider insects as food or as pests? Chances are that your perspective wasn't learned through direct experience, but through culture. So I'm not saying that someone would have sat us down and said, now, Susie, this is a grasshopper and it's good to eat, and this is how you eat it. No, but rather you saw someone eating a grasshopper or a snail as a delicacy, and you imitated it. In the same way, as a child, you might have found a grasshopper in the yard, put it in your mouth, and then found yourself surrounded by adults saying, oh, spit it out, yuck, yuck, call the doctor. And you had just been taught eating grasshoppers is bad. In this same way, we have been taught as a culture to be an exclusive society. And we simply accept our exclusive culture as natural, rather than understanding our culture is simply one of multiple stories or belief systems that we can live by. And we call our belief system, our BS, reality. I want to read from Sharif's book here. He says, while culture maintains behavior, the opposite is also true. Behavior maintains culture. Behavior sets up a tendency, a field in which it is easier to act within the direct dictates of culture than it is to operate outside of it. It is easier to live the breaker story, even when you know it is dysfunctional, than to change it. Wow, I love that. Well, I don't love it, but it's reality, right? It is easier to maintain a breaker consciousness than to change it, even when we know it's dysfunctional and no longer serves us. So like, anyone tried to give up smoking or give up opioids or give up some other habit, right? You know, it's not easy to change this. And this reminds me of Theory U that I want to go back to. Remember, we talked about Theory U of change and evolution that I introduced in August, and we've been referencing off and on since then. And in Theory U, we're reminded that at the beginning of the change process, it is wrought with struggle to maintain the status quo. And the example I shared, one of the examples, was the caterpillar, who has no idea that it's intended to be a whole other creature, the butterfly. So when it enters the chrysalis, it begins a fight for its very life, the only life it has ever known. Much like the rabbits on Rabbit Island. And we humans are experiencing such a time of exponential change and transition here on planet Earth right now. And some of us are awake to it sometimes as menders, right? A mender consciousness. And at other times we drift back into breaker unconsciousness because it's what we've learned, what's familiar, it's the culture, the belief system. This is how it's supposed to be. And so we maintain our breaker behaviors even when it's killing us. Even when it's killing us. Sharif points out that just as the caterpillar is imbued with these imaginal cells, we too have within us an unawakened knowing, perhaps dormant, just like the cells of the caterpillar to become the butterfly. We have this innate knowing that we can no longer live as breaker individuals in a breaker society. And so what happens within that caterpillar is a revolution taking place as these imaginal cells begin to fight off and destroy the cells of the caterpillar. Regardless how healthy and strong the caterpillar may seem, the status quo may be, until the caterpillar is dissolved to that which is unrecognizable, and the beginning of a new and greater society, a new way of being can finally emerge. And in order to create that turnaround, a revolution is necessary. And for us as humans, it's a revolution in our consciousness, which will require a spiritual discipline. I just love this book. It's so rich. So I want to read another piece here from Sharif. This is on page 151 for those who might be doing the study group later. Being a mender, an activist for an inclusive society, is a spiritual discipline. We practice a different kind of Working to alleviate suffering is the way we practice our faith. We try not to act from anger or fear. We act because in the life we have been given, we believe we can help make things better. In the spirit-driven model, it doesn't matter whether a person is successful in changing the condition. I love this part. Success doesn't mean I've saved an endangered species or cleaned up a toxic waste dump or fed hungry children. Success means awakening in myself a spirit that can help make a better life for others. Success means awakening in myself a spirit that can help make a better life for others. You know, I think in the history of our unity movement, we are experiencing one of the most trying times that we've ever faced since the Depression. And Unity Kitchener is facing one of the most trying and opportune times as well. The face of ministry has been changing and can be difficult. And the COVID pandemic has really added fuel to the fires of change. However, we know fires serve two purposes, right? One is making a clearing. The other is to fertilize the soil for new growth. That growth can only happen once a clearing has been made. I believe what we are experiencing as a ministry and as a movement and as a world is exactly this. We are beginning a clearing to fertilize the soil for a new growth, a revolution in consciousness. For our unity movement to return to the old days when it was flourishing as a cutting edge and relevant and relatable spiritual movement, we need to clear out some of our old habits, some of our old patterns. And we need this clearing in order to fertilize and plant seeds for the new and amazing opportunities that are to come. And this all could not be happening at a more auspicious time for us and in our own lives. Because our world is going through a major transition in consciousness, which is forcing us to ask questions we've never asked before and to search for answers that we've never sought before. And unity, I believe, is a positive path for people seeking and finding those answers. And so what this all boils down to is that the time for our unity movement and for Unity Kitchener is now to reach out and share our message that it is more relevant and more necessary now than ever. And now is the time that we equip and prepare ourselves for our next stage of greatness to unfold. And this transition begins with a revolution in consciousness. And only through this revolution in our own consciousness will new patterns of behavior and new ways of being emerge. And through this revolution in consciousness that is unfolding right now, we clear the way and we become the fertile soil for a new way to emerge, to create a world that works for all. So I love you and I bless you. And I behold that revolution in consciousness that is actively happening in you right now. Namaste.